glad and encouraged them all to remain true to the Lord with all their hearts. He was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and faith, and a great number of people were brought to the Lord. When Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul, and when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. So for a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught great numbers of people. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. During this time, some prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. One of them, named Agabus, stood up and through the Spirit predicted that a severe famine would spread over the entire Roman world. This happened during the reign of Claudius. The disciples, each according to his ability, decided to provide help for the brothers living in Judea. This they did, sending their gift to the elders by Barnabas and Saul. The word of the Lord.
Sorry. Can you hear me? Good. Yeah, I was actually hanging out in the back today. I like to do that sometimes, especially when Jared takes the first part of the service, just so I can make sure you're all singing and paying attention, okay? So, and you guys passed the test. I was telling Robert, it actually sounded pretty good back there today, so that's all, you can take some of the credit for that. Today, we move with the church out from beyond familiar territory, out from Jerusalem, out from Judea, and yes, even out beyond Samaria and the Galilee to the edge of the Holy Land's Mediterranean shores. Today we follow the Spirit as far west as we can go without boarding ship to a city called Antioch. This city is also known as Syrian Antioch to distinguish it from another Antioch, which is up in the boundaries of modern Turkey, called Pisidian Antioch. Antioch in the first century was still a relatively young city, only about 300 years old. Alexander the Great had conquered the known world in what year? Anybody remember? It's really easy. 333. You'll never forget that now, will you? He conquered the world in 333, and he brought Greek culture and Greek language to every place he went. When Alexander died, the territory of his conquest was divided amongst his generals, and the most powerful general was Seleucus Nicator. And this general established what came to be known in his territory as the Seleucid Empire. And it was Seleucus who built this city and named it after his father Antiochus. By the time of Jesus, Antioch had become quite an important outpost for the Roman Empire. For if Antioch was as far west as one could go in the Middle East, it was also strategically positioned as far east as one could go on the Mediterranean Sea. And thus, as far as Rome was concerned, Antioch was the gateway to the east. Antioch today is a small town in the country, within the borders of modern-day Syria, and it's only got about 40,000 people living there. But in Roman times, Antioch was the third largest city in the whole Roman Empire, with some 400,000 people. Yet it had a decidedly lowbrow reputation compared with the first two cities. Number one, of course, was Rome, and Rome was Rome. But number two was Alexandria, and it was the center of scholarship. It was famous for its huge library, but because it was on the African coast rather than on the Middle Eastern coast there at the far eastern edge, it did not have the strategic importance of Antioch. And so Antioch was favored by Rome, but generally looked down upon by Romans. The government built the place up, but everyone else kind of looked down upon it because it was one of these really fast-paced port cities. You didn't want your family to experience Antioch, to live there, unless perhaps one of your children was an aspiring vice squad detective in the police force. It was that kind of place. It was a city of vice, perhaps the ancient equivalent of Las Vegas. Antioch had such a bad name that the Roman army had a policy of not allowing its soldiers to enjoy their liberty in Antioch. And if a soldier can't have liberty somewhere, it must be really bad. If a Roman soldier was caught in certain disreputable districts of Antioch, he could be imprisoned, so bad was that city's reputation. Amazingly, though, and this should not surprise us, as bad as it was, Antioch was the city in the Middle East where Christianity came together and then took off. The book of Acts tells us how the Holy Spirit worked in and through the church at Antioch to reach the Roman Empire through the message of Jesus Christ. In fact, the book of Acts describes the church at many different cities, but here in this text we focus on the church at Antioch. Acts is about mission, about reaching out and moving forward, led by the Spirit. But here in verses 19 through 24, and sprinkled throughout all the book of Acts, amidst the stories of outward mission, Luke provides us with windows into the inner workings of the church. A big part of Luke's storyline in Acts is how the Holy Spirit brought the church together so together they could go turn the world inside out and upside down for God. As I mentioned last week, I'm into these audiobooks now. If you pull up next to my car at a stoplight, you won't hear loud music blaring. You'll hear a narrator reading a book. So I wonder if people think I'm a geek and a dork for listening to that. But anyway, it's really helping me out. It's making my drives more interesting. And I'm right in the middle of that biography of Lincoln called Team of Rivals. Certainly for Lincoln and for the nation in the 1850s and 1860s, there were foreign concerns. There were foreign policy questions. There were other nations to relate to and to be concerned about. But clearly in that period, the big issue was an internal one, the question of slavery in the new Western territories. If the nation could not get its internal questions settled, it would disintegrate. And during the Civil War, it nearly did. For the first century church in its new headquarters at Antioch, the big question, that big internal issue, was Jews and Gentiles. How to live as a new people of God with Jew and Gentile together when the prior history, looking back into Judaism, had been based on separation. The temple had been built to ensure separation. And so they're starting this new thing, this new Christian thing within Judaism. And not only do people have to come to terms with Jesus as Messiah, but also with what it means to be Jew and Gentile together when previously they had been entirely separate. In verse 19, Luke tells us that the missionaries from Jerusalem who'd come to the north were still practicing separatism between Jews and Gentiles. They shielded the gospel from Gentiles, telling the story of Jesus only to Jews. The way for the church to move past this separatism came from the Holy Spirit in a very unexpected way. From other missionaries had come to Antioch, not from Judea in the south, but from the Mediterranean island of Cyprus and from the North African coastal town of Cyrene. You see, even before the church had formally reached out to these places, the Holy Spirit